Yeah, massive spoilers, people. You have been warned. In a couple of seconds, I'm going to spoil everything about POF, so turn the video off if you are still trying to hide your head under the sand.
So, Casimir, when we meet more of your gods, I hope they're a little less hostile than the last one we met.
With our luck, I bet they're as crazy as Balthazar is.
Stop it, both of you. We're here for answers. And spitting in the face of the gods isn't going to help us get them. Show some respect.
She's right. If Balthazar demonstrated anything, it's that the gods aren't to be taken lightly. Let's tread carefully here. We don't know who's watching.
I'm not exactly sure what this video is supposed to be. It's not an even-handed review of the Path of Fire story. It's not even a particularly informed commentary on the Path of Fire story, because I've only played it once and I don't know too much. But it is gonna be about the Path of Fire story. Maybe this is just an excuse to get the comments section rolling so I can get your takes, guys, on how you felt about this. But yes, yesterday I did at last finish the plot of Path of Fire, and whoa boy, what an adventure. So there's a hell of a lot to go into. This will be my greatest challenge yet to not speak for far, far, far too long. But I want to talk in broad strokes in terms of the large beats, what I took away from this, how my experience was. Many of you have wanted to know. And I mean, I think it's been said largely all over the internet already. This thing was fantastic. These are the best instances they've ever made in the franchise. Nothing in Guild Wars 1 hits the quality of the environments we go to, of the kind of gameplay we experience here in Path of Fire. Nothing in Guild Wars 2 up until now has done it. Not by and large, there might have been small individual high points. This has just been a huge bump up in terms of quality. Guild Wars 2's reached a new level. I really do believe it. There's so many excellent things that happened across the 3 arcs of Path of Fire. The moment with Vlast, the visiting of Kesha, the scene with the library, everything about the final instance, and even just small moments like the Minion Mancery kind of moment where we get to swap between regular skills and commanding undead, the race section we get towards the end, the callbacks to earlier Living World moments like where we get to use our combo ability with Aurene. All of it is fantastic. In terms of length, I will say I still don't think it's quite meaty enough. I think there could be a bit more. It's probably something to do with the way that Guild Wars 2 relies on open world to prop up its storytelling, and I, for whatever reason as a player, don't fully appreciate when it does that, and I'm not quite sure what that is. It will take a lot of thought and a lot of deliberation, and certainly a video much longer than this one to properly unpack all of that. But let's talk about it in broad strokes, what the highlights were, what the big moments were. For anybody who hasn't played Path of Fire, hopefully you'll get a good impression of the territories this story covered. And I've mentioned it in a recent VOD. The Path of Fire story has pretty much hit every major storyline I think it should have for this region of the world. I did a video before the expansion came out saying these are the stories that Path of Fire could and should go into, and basically all of them were touched on except the Staff of the Mists. I think that's the only thing, and we've already sort of done a thing about that. So let's first talk about Act 1, some highlights from memory on my first playthrough.
Joko's government sent representatives of the Morden Crescent to Amnoon to offer military support against the Forged. The Morden Crescent may no longer be the honorable Sunspears they once were, but they would make powerful allies.
The first thing that really struck me was we get to open up and have this decision as to what we do with the fate of the Amnoon Oasis. Do we try and drag the Sunspears into this? They may be a weak force, and the people of Cormyr, but maybe, you know, they're the best people to turn to. Do we try and keep the place neutral? Do we sell them out to Joko's armies who have power, but are obviously just trying to manipulate Amnoon to fall under their control, despite having been neutral for all these years? I sold them out to Joko. I loved this, and I've realized about myself, whenever I do get a decision, as much as I care about the story, I tend to go for the more chaotic and scary approach. So we don't really, in the expansion, get to see a proper payoff on this. When you make a decision here, you get to see in the open world, undead start patrolling the streets. And at the very end of the story, you see a bit more of the fallout, but I'm guessing the fallout of this decision will be given to us in Living World Season 4, which is funny because Heart of Thorns did something for Season 3, which was the Logan Zodja thing, which still is kind of left hanging even now in the story today. But I loved this. We didn't get that many decisions, and maybe that's a good thing, because too many decisions makes the story too unwieldy to develop. But we got this one, and it was a great start. I never realized either, but depending on who you choose at the start of the story here, it unlocks a collection for the rest of your gameplay where you get to show support. So as I was playing through the expansion, I was kind of like showing support for the Awakened, and it will be fun to see whether the devs play with this very much at all, considering what happens at the end of the story. And we're going full spoiler mode here. The end of the story, Amnoon seems to get like branded or something.
Me too.
I hate to interrupt, but did anybody feel that?
Feel what?
Oh dear.
Tell me this is just normal evidence.
And they've left a really weird staging ground for the start of the next season. I guess we're jumping ahead a bit there, though, so I'll talk about that in a second. So the first main instance, really gameplay-wise, as far as I remember, is we attack a forged stronghold. This, to me, is some proper classic Guild Wars / Guild Wars 2 gameplay. You know, this is party-based, running around with our regular skills. Interesting little mechanics, you know, stopping these scouts from getting to their various destinations and relaying messages, and, you know, picking off enemies and attacking patrols as they come in. This is classic Guild Wars to me. And really, very little of the expansion offered this kind of classic Guild Wars experience. So many of the other instances are kind of scared to do this kind of raw gameplay, and they prop themselves up with lots of other mechanics going along all the time. And it's curious to me because I've only realized recently that Guild Wars is constantly having to do exotic and interesting and varied things on top of the regular gameplay experience to make their instances fun. And I wonder whether they have to be that scared about it, because I think that this Forged attack mission was actually quite interesting. So here as well, we get lots of side lore, which did volumes for the story, right? So like explanations about the Eternals, and explanations about the Shadow Army, and all these extra things that really had been neglected by the expansion, and hadn't been touched on as they just thrown the Forged in out of nowhere. We at least get explanations via this extra dialogue, and I really think that went a very long way. Another really cool thing that this instance did was it set up the existence of a giant machine that will only come back at the end of the story. You know, like, this is a proper usage of Chekhov's gun here, and it was really nice at the end of the story for me to look back at this instance and think, oh yeah, they did set up that this machine was here. It was nice and early, and then they gave us just enough time to forget about it before, boom, it became a big plot element at the end. There was obviously the other cool stuff with the Temple of Cormyr. Brilliant bonus achievements. I won't go on too long about these, but pulling enemies away to allies away, to save their lives from the Herald of Balthazar. I've heard there are some weird theories as well that the Herald of Balthazar might be what were people saying, Devonna or something? I haven't quite read. I saw a Reddit thread about it, but didn't read it. There's a lot of little things like that I haven't picked up on just yet. But we meet the Order of Shadows there, who also have got a really weird role in the story. Have you guys noticed how frequently in these instances, there's like something weird going on, where it's like someone was there early? I'll mention an example in just a second. So at the end of Act 1 as well, Vlast. So the first Scion is a part of the story, and it comes into the story to die very quickly. And you might be angry at that because you might have been looking forward to it for a long time. I like this, though. I think that, you know, in this way, much as they did a lot in Season 3, they saw what the community was hoping for. They saw a loose end from Guild Wars 1. That was an important loose end. They brought it in. They made it a big part of the story, but they've also closed it out of the story very quickly, too. And the way this instance works, where you're just walking along and you see the dragon fly in after it's been attacked from the side and killed by... Oh, my goodness, as Balthazar attacks it. Brilliant, brilliant stuff. And then the way that they managed to give us all that extra dialogue from Vlast, even after he's been defeated, by interacting with the crystals around the second map. I think that was all really well handled. Funnily enough, Shaman has talked to me about the fact there was a cutscene that he's managed to data mine from this section of the story, which more explicitly showed in cutscene form Vlast being attacked by Balthazar. And I've got to say, I prefer the way that they've done it here. The cutscene didn't look that good. The cutscene would have broken the pacing of this. Opting to do this just a part of the experience was excellent. And I remember having an interview with a dev where they talked about this and, you know, figuring out where that line is of do you do it in a cutscene or not. It was absolutely the right call not to do this in cutscene. I felt so good seeing Vlast there, seeing them they were honoring this story. And, you know, it's got a nice feeling to it that the Guild Wars 1 hero defended this dragon from the Destroyers many years ago. And in exchange, it saves the Guild Wars 2 hero's life. I really liked that. So here we also get Ritlock. I'm going to have to rush quickly through this, otherwise we'll just be talking for hours. Then we also get the revelation of what Ritlock did in the Mists. Now, this was actually a very basic story they did in the end, wasn't it? But unexpectedly, even as basic as this was, I enjoyed this. I remember before the expansion came out, I was wondering, you know, they could add a lot of length by letting us play as Ritlock while he was there in this kind of Kaith format that they did in Living World Season 2. As much as I would have loved that, I also enjoyed the way they did use a cutscene here. And they, I don't know, there's something kind of mythical and magical and kind of backstory-wise that they've done, where it's like, yeah, Ritlock just found a man that was chained up and he released him. So Ritlock is responsible for Balthazar having returned to Tyria. And that story is, you know, not potentially some massive revelation on its own, but I think it was handled well, and I like to have seen at least what he was doing. Ritlock never talked about his adventures in the video game MXM at all. What's up with that, ArenaNet? But in all seriousness, I think that was a nice little revelation. And in the grand scheme of things, not even a very big part of the expansion, which makes it curious that that's what they opened the initial trailer with. But hey, maybe that's a minor thing. Moving on to Act 2, we also then have Glint's Lair. So I will say that this instance at Glint's Lair is probably the most delicately crafted. And in terms of like writing finesse, and the way that the dialogue's handled and the way that they managed to inject all this backstory and the different elements of what is genuinely quite a convoluted mess of a backstory. The way they managed to put it all in there, I think this is the highest quality writing in terms of like the way they actually managed to worm around a lot of stuff in the entire expansion. It was right here at Glint's Lair. And I think they did it very well. It was very impressive to me the way they managed to properly set up most of Glint's backstory and frame it the right way and remember the important details that have been gradually filtered in through a million different areas over 10 years of this franchise's existence. And even like seeing Big Snaff in there, that was a nice touch. They could have gone further, definitely. And I think that Destiny's Edge, original Destiny's Edge, really deserved to have a bigger role here. And in fact, you might even see it in the footage in the background here. I really think Zodja needed to be at this scene to see Big Snaff. I really think that, you know, some discussion from Ritlock a bit more about what happened in the novel here, because this is the emotion. What you're watching here should be the emotional climax and the closing of the book for Destiny's Edge original, and they weren't here. And I do think that that's a bit of a fault of the expansion, but there was so much other stuff that they had to work around. And as I say, it was all a lot. There was a lot of convoluted stuff that they were dealing with in the first place. I can kind of understand. There is still time and there is still space for Living World to get these characters to this place, but I wonder whether it was a bit forced at this point. And I think I wanted a bit more from Ritlock about coming back here. But yeah, we get these cool decisions where we get to decide which character we want to speak to first as well as we're going along, not really to do with this specific instance. But that's been quite fun. And I like the coherency as well as we enter Glint's Lair. Not in terms of the environments, but between gameplay mechanics too. Like the mechanics we're dealing with, the things we're fighting, remind you of the Season 2 instance. So those veteran players who have done all the story, you know, we're being reminded of something that was quite a few years ago now. And I know that there'll be a lot of Path of Fire only players who are experiencing this, and that will be lost on them. But there's some nice callbacks there. And they do another one at the end of the story as well, where we do the combo attack with Aurene, which we had just learned about in Season 3 in the Bitterfrost Frontier patch, and it was so good to see that come back. These things put such big smiles on my face. So there's so much to get to. Obviously, there will be more videos coming up, guys, and if there's something you feel I've missed, please leave in the comments. Moving hastily on, though, we then have the decision to visit the Mists. Makes perfect sense. Could have been talked about a little bit earlier than it was, but Casimir saying, yeah, let's go to the Mists. Oh my goodness, so they did this. Now, you guys remember, I was hoping for Augury Rock and the Ascension Chamber and a bit more lore on the gods. That ended up open world, and they didn't do very much of it. But they trumped it, because we get to go to the Mists here, and we get to visit a realm of the gods. We essentially go back, as far as I can tell, to the realm of Torment here. But it's the realm of Torment after Cormyr has built it up. Like, if you're swimming around in the pool here, you can see tendrils from the realm of Torment that are left over down there. And I thought that was a brilliant touch. The rituals to get in and learning about the Sun Spears and placing these objects into this circular thing on the ground and rotating them. You get this actual, like, different style of gameplay in Guild Wars we haven't had much of before, where it actually feels a bit more like a puzzle game. And just the environments, the silence, the sound design before you visit the actual library itself. And then the library. My goodness, this place. I mean, this really is one of the highest moments of all of Path of Fire. These later parts of Act 2 are incredible. And it really works to the devs' advantage too, because they've been so well built as instances. They can kind of get away with not even doing much with the story, but it still feels epic and exciting and wonderful. For a moment, I thought I was in the Hall of Heroes. I thought I was in the Rift. And then it turned out to be the library. And I actually prefer that it was a library that we'd not heard of before instead of the Hall of Heroes and the Rift, because I think they can save that for an even bigger moment in the story, even later, perhaps. But so, yeah, like, they don't actually, in this instance, do much. And I think in terms of, like, raw story, maybe I'm okay with that as well. But, like, what do we hear? Yeah, the gods are leaving. Yeah, Cormyr was lingering a bit, and she's now totally leaving. Like, it's the same story, really. It's just sort of pushing our face a bit more evidently. And, you know, they still haven't explained why the gods, as far as I know right now, they haven't fully explained why the gods are abandoning Tyria. They haven't really pushed the envelope that much. And as far as Balthazar is concerned, and what we learn about Balthazar in this instance, again, I loved every moment of it, but I do think that Balthazar's character development in this expansion has genuinely been a bit poo. Like, what's exciting about Balthazar as opposed to dealing with an Elder Dragon as an antagonist? That he can be a bit nuanced, that we can maybe relate with him, we can empathize with him a little bit, we can sort of get on his level, we can understand him a bit more, he's more scrutable. He's really not. The way they handle him is literally, as far as I know right now, and again, this is not a very informed video because I haven't played it enough times to know all of the information, but so far it feels like Balthazar's character is just, yeah, I do what I want. I want to kill Elder Dragons. You can't make me stop. I do what I want. It's my power. I'll go for it. Okay, so we're going to chain you up, and then he gets freed, and he goes for it. He's just like an angry, violent man, and not in like the interesting way that we got from Guild Wars 1 with the Mordecai, and he's just spiteful because he lost, a competition or whatever. Not Mordecai. What was the name of the character? I always confuse those. I always confuse this character with the name of Devonna's father. Anyway, it's not like in an interesting way. It's just, hey, I'm a cartoon character on a rampage, and they don't do enough of Balthazar. I really don't think they do. Now, that's not some slamming criticism. But you know, you might not even realize at the time how little they push the envelope in this instance because it is so beautiful. What a great instance. Like, you see the flying books. Did anybody notice that there's not birds in this instance, but they're actually books flapping their wings? I spent so long here doing these achievements. Took ages to find the hidden room in the water as well. You get all that extra lore. And so here's the most fascinating thing about the library to me. Did you guys notice that weird message with the cipher that you can sort of play around with a bit once you've gone into the hidden room? It's like suggesting someone's been here, like the whisper. I think it's got something to do with the Order of Shadows. But the next instance, when we go to Kesha, the hidden city, there's like another suggestion someone's been there, that they sabotaged the door so that it wouldn't open. We have to actually break open. What's going on here? And then some of the dialogue from the Order of Whispers is suggestive of something. It's really curious. I gotta dig into it more, but this has really caught my attention. What is going on here, guys? But yeah, so that's the library. That's the Mist instance. My goodness. You'll hear me gushing more about that in future videos, I'm sure. Moving on, we go to Kesha. So this hidden city, we do get more exalted stuff. Remember what I said, everything I wanted this expansion to touch on, they touch on. We see more exalted in this expansion. We find a whole other golden city. We don't get to explore it enough, and maybe there's some extra things they could have gone with, but the instance is beautiful. You get this giant JP. Sitting here now in my chair at the end of playing through it all, and without having done a second replay and without properly organizing my thoughts, I can't really remember too many like explicitly awesome things from here, except that door being sabotaged and just sort of the general pushing of the plot. But I'm glad that they went to this area. I'm glad they did this, and once again, it was another one of these areas that totally blew me away. Act 2 ends, of course, moving hastily on, with our death.
I'm sad for you to die. lie so far from truth. Ah, the Sire. Come here to defend our champion.
Maureen!
And now, you die.
Oh boy, we die and come back to life. If there was any one spoiler I think that people should be scared of in this expansion, it's that we die and come back to life. Because on paper, this sounds super extreme, right? In terms of the way the expansion ends, I think it's pretty much on par with what we could have expected it to end. And that's not a criticism. Just because we expect the story to end a certain way and then it does end that certain way is fine. It's not a game. It's not a product in media's job to constantly wrong-foot you. Being wrong-footed can be fun narratively, but it's not the be-all and end-all. And so the fact that this story ends with Balthazar dying and that power being absorbed by Aurene to accelerate her growth and stuff, that stuff isn't necessarily as interesting on paper as hearing that we die in this expansion. So, as a disclaimer, I've not read anything about this online. Nothing. I haven't read it a single thread. I was not spoiled on this. I don't know what anyone on the planet thinks about this part of the story. Except one of my friends who messaged me on Skype about a vague thing to do with it, okay? So, I don't know what opinions people have put forth about it. But I suspect some of us will be crying foul and saying this is stupid and that it invalidates the importance of death in this franchise and so on, which is something Guild Wars has always played with. A lot of fantasy settings have to play with when you have this real idea of afterlives and underworlds and stuff. But I would say that I am perfectly happy with this, and I even really love this. I think as long as you lampshade, oh, don't die again a few times, which the expansion did, you can get around that side of things. But in terms of, like, is this okay for Guild Wars to have done? Is this some kind of wild new direction they should never have gone in? Does this, is this too cavalier with the world building? It's totally not, and I'll tell you why it's not. Because this happened in Guild Wars 1. This happened in Guild Wars 1, and this is why I think I like this so much. Because the hero in GW1 died. Loads of us died. We got slaughtered by Shiro Togashi, killed, and on our way to the underworld, our progress there was intercepted by the envoys, who should have shepherded us there. But they said, no, look, we'll save your life as long as you deal with Shiro for us. And so we were like, yeah, cool, let's do it. If you guys remember my lore series that I did, summing up the Guild Wars 1 story, that currently is ended in Cantha, with that moment where we die in. I had so much fun writing that part of the story and presenting it to you guys as I repackaged it from the devs originally gave it to us in Guild Wars 1, where it was always very poorly handled. I remember so clearly writing that script and wanting a black screen, and then slowly an envoy's face would appear, and I knew that the cliffhanger of that video was going to be, and then an envoy appears, and I did it. I'm still very proud of how I ended that video. And so then here, in 2017 in Path of Fire, I get to see the devs are finding a similar story fun. We die, and they do the long black screen, and I knew immediately, the second we died, I knew immediately that the devs had been happy to do this because it had happened in Guild Wars 1. And I've mentioned in some recent videos, I've been desperately hoping for some kind of Cantha reference throughout Path of Fire. And I was so hoping, when I was sitting there watching this black screen, I was so hoping to see an envoy come on, and that they'd reintroduce the envoys to the story, and this would be some kind of like through line for us to start thinking about Cantha long term. We never met an envoy in the story, but we do go to the underworld, and we see what the underworld is like since Grenth has disappeared, which we now know because of the events of the previous instance. So that's funny, isn't it, right? Like, they haven't just abandoned Tyria, but they've abandoned their own realms. which is pretty wild. The instance itself was a brilliant instance. I got a little bit lost, to be honest. I didn't trigger some dialogue and ended up wandering around aimlessly for ages. But you get that nice recap of the entire story, which I suspect might be nice for totally new players who kind of want a quick catch-up. I did this on a character that had never done any personal story whatsoever, so I got to experience like a recap of events that I was never actually on this toon, but I think they made the right call. I wonder whether there's more specific stuff if I'd chosen orders and things. And in fact, that's another area. I think Path of Fire has genuinely failed in not giving enough moments based on our past choices. But maybe that's just something I have to accept. Maybe that's not Path of Fire's failing. Maybe that, once again, is Corteria's failing. That's Corteria's failing for putting so much crap in the game that now the devs are constantly being asked to look back at, otherwise they'll be deemed a failure. Maybe it's not Path of Fire. Maybe it's, 2012 and the hubris and the overconfidence to add so much stuff and so many choices way back when. But let's not get into that too much. The instance itself I was very happy with. I'll note at this point how awesome Path of Fire was for co-op gameplay too. So you are a lost spirit. Your character becomes known as a lost spirit, but any allies you're playing with, they become like little sprites that can follow you around, and at several different times the ally you're playing with gets like a different skill bar and different stuff. So like when you are doing the awakened one later, they become a mummy that will follow you around. So the devs really paid attention to the co-op experience here, and they did other amazing stuff. Recolored the health bar to look a different color while we're a spirit, removed the mini-map. Oh my, this is I think the second time ever Guild Wars 2 has removed the mini-map. You guys know I love mini-map-less gameplay, and so I love this in this instance. I really want a user interface option to disable that all the time. Come on, that would be so good. But yeah, an excellent instance. Much like many of them, really. I mean, it's not too much of an outlier, but this was very fun to see how they played with us being a spirit and refinding our name. I think us coming back to life is perfectly fine. And again, really, the detail and the quality from Path of Fire isn't necessarily the direction of the story all the time, but how it's presented. Like, look at how beautiful this instance is when we come back to life and the sun out there and the glow. Oh, it's fantastic. So, there is another component of that. We meet Joko. The only time we meet Joko is here, and we find out he's been chained up by Balthazar. This I also found really fun. Now, Joko himself, the way he sounds, the way he looks, I don't know, he disappointed me. I don't know. What is it? What's wrong with me? Every single time a character, like when we first saw Balthazar, he disappointed me. When we saw Lazarus, he disappointed me. There's something, when we saw Aurene, her design disappointed me. I don't know what the hell I'm expecting. But for some reason, when they go back to these characters at the moment, I'm just like, it's not what I wanted fully. I'm sure eventually I'll get used to Joko, and this is such a minor thing. But does anyone else feel that? Like, when I saw Joko there, I was like, oh, I guess I was expecting something more. Maybe it was something about his voice acting. Maybe it wasn't that he joked around as much as I thought. I mean, he was funny in how arrogant and overconfident he was, but he wasn't funny in the way I expected. Not that I didn't like Joko. And so let's talk about the actual direction they went with. So Joko's been chained up in the underworld. He is absent. He is MIA during this expansion, but we meet him here. It's very clear Season 4 is going to deal with a lot of Joko stuff, and I love the way that the devs played with our expectations. The devs know that the informed player base are going into this instance expecting to meet Joko and expecting to have to do a deal with the devil, just as we did in Guild Wars 1. They know that. They know that that's what the community wants. The community wants to make a deal with the devil. I want to make a deal with the devil. And so, as you're talking to Joko, you start seeing it unfolding before your eyes, and you think, oh yeah, we're going to make a deal with the devil. And then beautifully, they snatch that away from us. The devs know that we're thinking that. And then they say, no, the Guild Wars 2 hero is smart on this. And no, we're smart enough. We're not going to do a deal with the devil. But now the question is, what's the cost of having said no to Joko here? Now Joko's going to be our enemy. We're going to defeat Balthazar, and that's going to, remove the limits on Joko here, and Joko's going to be able to come back to the real world. I thought this was all brilliant. I thought it was brilliant how Joko was kind of in limbo because he's not really dead or undead, and he shouldn't really be here, but he's bound by Balthazar, and no one's powerful enough to break it.
This is your last chance. I will return to reclaim my throne. And I will have my revenge on those who put me here, who left me here, and who dare take advantage of my absence. The torture. Oh yes, I have plotted it out. I will just laugh as their wretched pleas for a longer life turn to desperate cries for a faster death.
I loved it. I loved everything about how Act 2 ended, just as I loved everything about how Act 1 ended as well. And so, then we've got Act 3. I've already talked quite a lot about how little story there was in the Desolation. Hopefully Living World Season 4 will deal with that, as, you know, the fact that Joko is going to be becoming more of a part of the story. I did appreciate that at this point, the first half of Act 3, the devs threw a lot of us about the hierarchy and ranking and characters that the upper levels of Joko's army consist of. And I liked getting that there was a lot here, and I think that there need to be a lot here to show that, you know, there's all this stuff going on. But it was a bit lost on me. They did throw all these characters very quickly, and we killed some of them very quickly. And I don't know, maybe on replays I'll start to settle in my mind who all these people were, and I'll start to get lost in the magic of how much was going on with Joko. But it all happened very, very quick. I do think the story got a bit thin on the ground here. It was nowhere near as bad as Heart of Thorns. Once we did the instance with the egg. Heart of Thorns, after you do the egg instance, it just got terrible. It was so short, it was so thin, tiny little missions. Like, can you compare? You remember in Heart of Thorns that instance where we find the map showing Ratanovus? Like, look at that instance. That instance is completely incomparable to anything in Path of Fire. Path of Fire is that much better. So, Path of Fire, Act 3, I think it gets a bit thinner on the ground. Too thin on its ground for its own good. The best moments of this story I found, I like the party at the end, and like the moments where we get a bit more breathing room. Like, I particularly enjoyed being able to return to the Amnoon Oasis and talk to the characters we'd met there before going to the Ellen Riverlands, right? I think that was a really important thing to do. That's the kind of thing Heart of Thorns was missing. Heart of Thorns needed that moment to go back and speak to the Itzel and the Nuhok and stuff and sort of meet up with our new allies. Path of Fire did it a little bit with that. I think it needed a bit more, and particularly here in Act 3, I think it needed a little bit more. But that said, the very end stuff when you get to Vabi, the instances themselves were great. This race where we're charging around on our mounts, and the Minion Mancer instance where we basically get to swap between our regular skills and undead skills. This is also fantastic. This genuinely has inspired me so much. I want the balance team to look at this instance and be like, all right, we're going to rework Minion Mancy for Necromancers in Guild Wars 2 to be as fun as this is, because that is such fun Minion Mancer gameplay. That's what Necros should feel like. They should get a Minion Mancery elite spec that really looks back at this. And hey, who knows? Some of the elite specs this time seem to look at some Heart of Thorns things, so we'll see. But yeah, the last of the story, let's really dig in at the very end here. We get to claim Sahothin from Ritlock, and we get these super overpowered skills. Very fun. I see what the devs are doing here. What they've done is they've taken away our regular skill bar and our trait interactions and stuff so that they can design a proper instance without having to worry about noobs on terrible builds having a bad experience, or veterans on overpowered builds having a bad experience, either by trivializing or having too frustrating of an experience. So they've like standardized our combat capabilities mostly by giving us Sahothin. Sahothin feels really fun to use this on these epic long cooldown abilities. This is what elite skills, in my opinion, should always have been like in Guild Wars 2. Extremely powerful effects on extremely long cooldowns. That has some other balance things we don't need to get into, but it's a fun instance. Racing through, the achievements are really good. Once again, they opt to have cutscenes or not have cutscenes in the right ways. We see Kraukatoric. Not all of Kraukatoric. Isn't this interesting? There is not a proper Elder Dragon fight in this expansion. There's not one. They just decided we're not going to do it. And indeed, in this expansion, we don't even kill an Elder Dragon. An Elder Dragon factors into it. And seeing Kraukatoric start to participate in our battle against Balthazar on this huge temple with the statues of Joko there is so wonderful. But really, we only see his head and we see hints at him. Are the devs just stalling, buying time for when the game engine can do even more stuff and we can get a proper Shadow of the Colossus style battle? No Elder Dragon KO in this fight. And if anything, we get an Elder Dragon be charged up. And I love how that was twisted on its head. We made it worse now. Kraukatoric is stronger, and there's something about that I really enjoyed from the story. I'll note back on the Sahothin thing that Ritlock gave it to us. They never took the time at this moment in the story to tease us about the origins of Sahothin. Like, I think a little line right here, where when we claim the sword off of Ritlock, we say, where did you get this anyway? And he says, later, cub. I think that would have been so good. They don't even do that. Is that because they're scared to tease at that? Or is that because they don't care about that mystery anymore? They'll never give it to us? It seemed to all become about his mystery of what he did in the Mist. But what about the original Ritlock mystery? There's still a lot about his origins and his warband I'd like to know. Maybe a proper Char expansion that will be coming up. And so, yeah, the mechanics are solid and fun. We do destroy Balthazar. So in kind of a duel, I've seen some people online saying, oh, this wasn't good because, you know, I don't want to 1v1 if it makes Balthazar look weak. I wanted this in a raid. And yes, I and you know that it being in a raid would have been a much more profound experience, but they cannot do that. This is not that kind of MMO. They won't do that. They shouldn't do that. We're going to get a 1v1 experience of taking out a god in a story. We're going to become a god slayer. And all I think the devs could have done, again, it relates to Sahothin. Like, I understand that we're able to kill him because we've got Aurene with us, and Aurene is this crazy badass and potentially can become an Elder Dragon. I get that, right? And they demonstrated in A Crack in the Ice how strong she is, and we get to do that mechanic again, which is so wonderful. But I think that they missed a really great opportunity here. What they could have done is explain that it was because of Sahothin as well that we're able to beat him. We know that Sahothin and Magdair, they are relics of Ore. And as relics of Ore, potentially these relics have some, basis, some founding in the gods who once upon a time lived in Ore. All Path of Fire needed to do, and I really lament that they didn't do this, is explain at some point that this artifact is a god art, it's a divine artifact, and it's fiery, right? So why not just explicitly say, yeah, this was like bestowed to people by Balthazar long ago. This is Balthazar himself. This is a significant portion of Balthazar's power, and that's why we are even capable of battling against him on these terms. And Aurene can save us from this crazy one-shot KO that would otherwise insta-kill us, and we can save Aurene from that, and we can do some damage. But I think that showing that it was Sahothin's power that really managed to key into the defeat of Balthazar, I think that would have been really good, and they didn't do that, so I think that's a bit of a shame. But what a cinematic end! What do you guys think about the fact that we just had an expansion with no Elder Dragon death or battle? I hope the devs do figure out some way to deliver it to us properly. And story-wise, I like it, though, because it's like, yeah, we need to slow down. Don't kill them. We've got to figure out how to replace the Elder Dragons properly. So, then they also sort of end on this moment of Aurene taking the magic. Again, this is to be expected for me. I'm pretty sure we all knew that this kind of had to happen to get her to grow quicker. We get a hint at the end of the story of a more adolescent-looking Aurene. This is the kind of Aurene that I can really get behind. She's much more sharp-toothed, pointy-faced. I'm excited to see what she's like when we next interact with her. And there was so much in the expansion, like Vlast. I never mentioned the way that they talk about Vlast as having this like dark side to him and needing to bond with some living person as Aurene bonds with us, otherwise, kind of becoming sort of evil and messed up, and that being a real fear. And now how we can see all that story that came from Vlast and what this could mean for Aurene. I think that all works really well. How Act 1 ties into the very final moments of the end of Act 3. How Living World Season 4 can deal with that will be very fun. And then we kind of get this bonus instance at the end with the party scene. I think the party scene was brilliant. This is what we need. An epilogue. Yes, Path of Fire gave us an epilogue. Another problem with Heart of Thorns was satisfied. We get some breathing room. We get to discuss things with all the characters we've met. They keep hinting at the Order of Shadows just that little bit more. I really like scenes like this. I think that this is the magic of the story, and it needs more of this. This is the meat and potatoes, and I think we need more of this. Next expansion, definitely. It's instances like this, I think that the story really comes into its own. And I know that they've described that the expansions are supposed to be like movies, while the Living World is supposed to be the more relaxed TV show style stuff. But even Living World isn't giving us enough party scenes like this, I don't think. Or I don't know quite where that lies. Again, these are just my first impressions. We'll dig more into these a little bit later. I also found myself wondering a lot if E was in this crowd somewhere. Nothing happened with him, of course, in this story. But yeah, then we get another choice, like how do we want to deliver the speech? I thought this was fantastically well hidden. I was really deliberating, how do I want to deal with this speech? For anybody that wants to know, the way I did it in the end was I started upbeat, and then I went vague, and then I went vague again. I don't know, the idea of doing a pure vague speech by the end was very funny to me. And the way they react and like mumble, I can't hear you, was great, really, really great. And at the end of the party, we have the final big bomb. And this was very well handled as well. You actually see the storm clouds of Kralkatorrik and the spreading of the brand in engine swooping towards you. How amazing did this look? Before then cutting to a cutscene where we see, what are they hinting at? Kralkatorrik has destroyed Amnoon, and that could be why we get this choice of like, what is Amnoon's fate? Because what does this mean? When the Living World starts up, Amnoon's going to be destroyed. They're going to delete this from... Well, how are they going to do this? This remains a question constantly with Guild Wars 2. How do they handle the destruction of cities and things? Is that what they're showing, or are we seeing somewhere else? And then we see Kralkatorrik fly off over a bay. Does that mean he's going to the Scavenger's Causeway? Does that mean he's going south? I'll admit this was another moment where I was wondering about Cantha. And yeah, the brand is going to go further. I like all of this as well because I've always felt that Kralkatorrik should have been one of the stronger Elder Dragons, more interesting Elder Dragons. This means so much, guys. It means, like, the fact that Kralkatorrik isn't dead. You know what I mentioned about regular Destiny's Edge? They've got an opportunity to have their emotional conclusion as maybe they defeat him at some points. There's so many things. I think the final thing I'll leave this video on. I am astounded at what they've set up for Season 4. Season 4 has a lot to deal with. It's become very apparent to me that really good story has to happen in the seasons, not just in expansions. It's almost like they're setting up an Elder Dragon KO in the next season. I'm kind of worried about it. I really am, because Living World we know is more limited in what it can deliver. And it's got a lot of big stuff to deliver now. So what are they going to do for the next 2 years? Just meander us around other side stories and stuff, which is kind of what Season 3 did? Or are we going to be going like business as usual along Path of Fire main course stuff? I mean, Season 4 is a funny one to think about. And who knows, we could be seeing more of this in just 2 months or so. I think that all of this is great for keeping people in the game, for what it's worth. Like, I've never felt such a strong desire to see how the story continues in a streaming update that we know is coming very quickly. And I think that's incredibly strong for Guild Wars 2 as a scene. But yeah, there you go, guys. Those are my initial, very first takeaways. Geek out of the story. There you have it. There's some reactions for you, not live in the moment ones, as I know many of you want. Please, for the love of God, use the comment section here. I want to talk to you all much more about this and how you felt about it all. And believe me, anything I've skimmed over here, we'll be going into much more detail on very shortly coming up. I will probably do, like, Living World style coverage on the 3 acts, and treat one as if each was a Living World release, something like that, and we'll get all the nitty gritty and details out there. But there it is, a few moments after I finished Path of Fire. This is what I thought of it. Very well handled. The nitpicking will begin, and more detailed thoughts and analysis on little moments that I think they did well and didn't do well will be coming up. But broad strokes, wasn't this great? Wasn't it? We'll see what you guys think. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you all very shortly.
Meaning tranquility in the desert. At least for now.